The year of the tight end finally did arrive at Ohio State. Just didn't quite look the way anybody might have imagined, thanks in large part to the use of 1, 2, 3 tight ends at a time. Welcome to The Beat, presented by the Waterworks. This is the Austin Birm Show. He is Birm. I am Austin. It's a Three Thoughts Thursday, but it's also a position review and preview, and it is time to talk about the tight ends. Your favorite topic in mind, Birm?
I don't mind talking about it. I think it's actually one of the most interesting conversations about this team and the offense and where it's going and how it's going to continue to change. I also think it might be one of the more exaggerated conversations of topic in the last few months. And because I know that people see the regular use of multiple tight ends inside of the 10-yard line, but like that's football. And unfortunately, it didn't always work for Ohio State last year, but I don't think it was so out of character for Ryan Day or so different than anything else that Ohio State has done since Ryan Day took over as the head coach. I just think that the difference last year was that it just didn't seem to be as effective inside of the red zone. And I think that was because these guys were worse blockers than Ohio State's had at tight end in a while.
Yeah, it didn't connect. There were still, I think, plenty of bright spots. There were games where it was more effective than others. I think if you look at, Max Klare and Will Kazmarek combining for 58 catches and 4 touchdowns, there were, signs that was a productive part of the Ohio State offense as a whole. Between the 20s all year long, really, I don't think there was all that much issue with what was going on. And it just became, a flashpoint because the red zone success was not at the level that Ohio State expects, not what the Austin Birm Show expects. Like I've made this point throughout that regular season, was like, well, how can they get this fixed? They just keep throwing more and more tight ends at the problem seemingly, and they want to score touchdowns on 75% of drives inside the red zone. They did not do that. I think it's easy to point to the tight ends and blame them for that, and maybe even justified to do so if what you say is correct, that they were not as competent of blockers as they needed to be. The other solution would be to try something else and not put 13 or 14 personnel on the table. So that's not to wave it away or say, oh, it's overblown to talk about the tight ends or the personnel groupings. It was part of the issue because I think you're right. We've also talked about the inconsistency of the rushing attack. I don't put that solely on the offensive line. And so the one area that we haven't really talked about as much is the overall consistency of that group at tight end. And Max Klare was never going to be the strongest blocker in the world. Will Kazmarek was never going to be a game-changing receiving threat. We thought there was a chance going into last season that they could become an evolutionary version of Jeremy Ruckert and Luke Farrell. And I think as good as they may have been, they also were not that.
No, but I think there's also some of that doesn't fall necessarily on their shoulders. And I can already see the responses to this. Oh, they suck. They're blockers. I know that they struggled, but tight ends are not generally supposed to be blocking, defensive tackles and multiple defensive ends at one time. So, maybe they were competent blockers, but maybe they weren't really competent blockers in the low red zone where it's, at the 4-yard line and you're stacked up against a goal line front instead of being up against a linebacker or a smaller defensive end. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. But, when you think about Ohio State's productivity at tight end last year, they had 69 catches, almost 800 yards and 7 touchdowns out of your tight ends. 5 touchdowns out of your tight end. So like if Ohio State were to regularly get that sort of production out of one tight end, it'd be like the best school in the country for tight ends. So I think that it's moving in the right direction. And I think that in the way football is moving, and we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks as well, like this is where the game is going. Keenan Bailey's done a great job getting his guys to be better pass catchers. He's using his background as a wide receiver developer in his early years under Brian Hartline to that end. Cade Stover, who was a Mackey finalist in 2023, gives full credit to Keenan Bailey for doing that. Now they're trying to learn the other part, but it's also still just trying to fit sometimes, I think, a square peg into a round hole where the tight end is not supposed to be blocking 3 techs. I mean, that's just not what they're built for. So, and certainly you don't necessarily see Ohio State putting a freshman tight end who had never played fullback at fullback for the entire season, and then expecting him to be flawless. So I think that the more I think about the way that the guys were used, I actually like it. I think the execution suffered at times, but I don't think that Ohio State relied too heavily on the tight end or was uncreative. I think that they saw a potential opportunity for an advantage and just didn't capitalize on it. When they did other stuff, when they play actioned off of the 14 personnel or 13 personnel, it was always open. It was always there. I just don't think they did enough of that stuff. I think it was the lack of creativity when they had those big sets in the game that were the problem, and the matchup issues, because Jelani Thurman was at times a lazy blocker, or Max Klare had not really done much of that in his career, or Nate Roberts was a true freshman who hadn't really physically been ready to do that yet. So I don't have a problem with the schematics of it. I have a problem with the execution of it, and that is what happens sometimes when you try to do something different.
Well, when you review what Ohio State did with the tight ends last year and you think about a preview for what it might look like in 2026, you mentioned Ryan Day, and I know that I've had this conversation basically every offseason since he's been the head coach, that, I think about the year 2020, 2021, and it was like, well, the 12 personnel grouping, that's going to be on the field for Ohio State. Like, I think it was 38% of the time. That's the number that I always harken back to. It was one specific season. Like, that's sort of the optimal goal for what Ryan Day wants to do, not just in the red zone, but with the entirety of the offensive system. And I got news for you. If you bring in Arthur Smith, that's done because you still think that heavy personnel, 12 personnel, 13 personnel is the way of the future, which the NFL seems to be using as a counter to the lack of explosive ability with the way that defenses have adjusted to spread football over the last 4 or 5 years. So this is still going to be a key part of it. So when we say tongue in cheek, like your favorite conversation or mine, like tight ends are absolutely going to be a critical component of the way Ohio State plays offense. It was a year ago, and that's probably going to be even arguably more so with Arthur Smith's influence. I think it will come down to the last thing that you said, which is, are there going to be more creative ways to use them? And that's maybe what was lacking a year ago.
Yeah, and this year's group is going to be a different group. You lost your 2 tight ends. You lost 2 guys who are both going to be NFL players, and Max Klare and Will Kazmarek. And again, I know people scoff at the notion that Will Kazmarek's going to play in the NFL, but he's gonna play in the NFL for a long time. So you are now starting over. And so Keenan Bailey will be tested, like a lot of the other coaches on this team. He's a guy, you're returning 8 starters on offense. 2 of them that you're losing basically are tight ends. So, Will Kazmarek was extremely valuable. That's why you went out and got Hunter Welsing. That's why you went out and got Mason Williams from Ohio in this offseason. The Buckeyes brought in 17 transfers, and 2 of them were tight ends. Clearly, they believe that it's an important position that needed some addressing. But, when you're looking at who's the guy that this season is about at tight end, it has to be Nate Roberts. I mean, if Nate Roberts is the highest profile tight end recruit Ohio State has signed since Jeremy Ruckert in 2018, he's a guy that they've really circled early in the process as not just a player that they thought could fit the program, but as a guy that they thought they could build the future of tight end recruiting at Ohio State around, and say, this is the type of guy we're going to bring in. 6'5", 240 pounds. He can run, he can catch, he can do all the things. But you didn't know or didn't think that in year 1, the majority of his work was going to be as a fullback. So now you have to change that again, and you have to get Nate Roberts and a lot of the ups and downs that happened in his freshman year. And you have to convince him that he's got to be tight end number 1 in this roster this year. I know Hunter Welsing in year 7 and Mason Williams in year 4 of college ball have more experience. But if the offense is going to be the level that Arthur Smith needs it to be, and if it's going to elevate Julian Sand, then it has to be a guy like Nate Roberts leading the way. And so the rest of the room is just really interesting to me, because I think we went from the most talented and deepest Ohio State tight end room in program history to one that has a ton of question marks, because we don't really know what Nathan Roberts is as a pass catcher, as the primary option. Max LeBlanc is heading into year 3, has not sniffed the field. Bennett Christian is a team leader and a big, powerful blocker and a guy that you can count on, but certainly not a field stretcher or anyone like that. Brody Lennon in year 2, coming off of a freshman year where he didn't play. And then you add in 3 players in Hunter Welsing and Mason Williams and Nick Lauder as a true freshman. Like, there's a ton of question marks. I mean, I think that Arthur Smith arrives at the right time because his prowess is getting full usage out of the tight ends, but Keenan Bailey is going to have his work cut out for him very much in a way that I think like Cortez Hankton will, because there's a lot of people that don't trust that Keenan Bailey knows what he's doing at tight end. And I'm not one of those people. I think he's got a pretty good track record of it so far, but now you have to start basically over with all your guys. And that's when things get a little different.
I'm fascinated by the notion that like only last year for Keenan Bailey counts and none of the work before that happened, or that Cade Stover, when he swears by him and you see the production that he produces on the way to the NFL, that like that's somehow removed from the resume for Keenan Bailey. I don't fully understand that. I know that every year it's a constant evaluation. And if we're saying, was that the best coaching job of Keenan Bailey's career? The answer is probably not. But it's also not the only one that he did. And if Ohio State or Ryan Day didn't continue to have full faith in him, he wouldn't be here, because Keenan Bailey, every single offseason for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row, has had opportunities to go elsewhere, sometimes for more money, sometimes for more responsibility, sometimes for both. And Keenan Bailey believes in Ryan Day's program and being at Ohio State, and Ryan Day believes in him. And if those two things weren't true, they wouldn't be heading into another year together. A critical one, as you mentioned, where you have Max Klare gone, Will Kazmarek gone, Jelani Thurman gone. You have this level of attrition and transition. You know, he's still the guy. Could he have moved to wide receivers coach? Could he have? He's been in the mix for the offensive coordinator role. Is that a knock on him as a professional? I don't think so, because, and maybe I'm trying to look for too much of a positive spin on it. And if that may be the case too, but I think there's a case to be made that in this version of Ohio State's offense, they're not more important than the wide receivers. I'm not saying that, but if the evolution or enhancement of the running game is going to be reliant on the tight ends, and they're still a part of the passing attack, and they're still a key component of allowing Julian Sand to be his best version, keeping Keenan Bailey at tight end might have been the most appealing option. I don't know that, but I can see how that could be true.
Well, I mean, Ryan Day values continuity, but I think Keenan Bailey is a guy that understands that he gets to work this offseason with Arthur Smith and Ryan Day, and you get to work with the head coach, one of 4 active college national championship coaches. You get to work with Arthur Smith, a former NFL head coach from 2 years ago. This is a major opportunity. Keenan is one of those younger coaches, I think, that's really the prototype of the new way of thinking about your college coaching career, in that it doesn't really make sense for Keenan Bailey to take a job as the offensive coordinator at East Carolina or someplace like that, because it just doesn't matter. Like, you're better off taking the experiences you're getting at Ohio State and parlaying that into an eventual head coaching job, or a group of, like a Power 4 offensive coordinator opportunity that will come for him. But now, like, all of that stuff is irrelevant heading into this spring, because now it's about how do you get the most out of these guys that you have no idea about? How do you start over with a room with 7 people and only, Bennett Christian's played a considerable amount of football at Ohio State, but not really what I would consider the most high leverage snaps most of the time. Sure, they tried to throw him the ball against Indiana in a pretty high leverage moment, but Nate Roberts, again, has to be the guy, because that's where Keenan Bailey's staking his reputation. Can he develop a top 5 tight end in the country, a top 70 overall player that he went into Oklahoma and convinced to come to Ohio State? Can you take that guy and make him into an NFL tight end? And I think that Keenan understands his best path forward is to keep learning with Ryan and with Arthur Smith now, and developing his ability to develop. This is a guy who's been a quarterback's coach at Ohio State. He's been a tight ends coach. He's been a wide receivers coach. He worked with the offensive line in 2019 or 2020. Like, he's done it all. This is a completely all-encompassing career, and it's going to end up with him being a head coach somewhere by the time he's 35 years old, probably. But Ohio State fans don't care about that. They just want to know, can you make your tight ends catch the football and block guys? And so that's like it's almost like Keenan has to take a step back and go back to the basics of, what is my role as the tight ends coach now? Because I think that's going to be much more important this year than it was last year, when you had players like Kazmarek and Klare, who you sort of had a rough understanding of what they were going to bring you.
Yeah, so Keenan Bailey's position will not change, but the seasons, they will change. And comfort Well, it can't. So call the Waterworks and Hetter Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing for maintenance, installation, and repairs, or visit online at thewaterworks.com. The Waterworks and Hetter Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing is a proud sponsor of Ohio State athletics. I think, Berm, you touched on Nate Roberts and playing at fullback, and did anybody envision that or want it or like it as the season went along? It was a mixed bag, and it's what makes this next year or this spring, even in a month's time, when Nate Roberts is solely at tight end, so fascinating to me, because I don't think that he had a chance to really show what he could do. There were some routes that they threw to him, and it didn't look comfortable for him. And I'm thinking about the Purdue game most notably. But like, I don't know what to make of any of it, because he was on the field as a true freshman. No one is supposed to be a finished product. He was playing at fullback. He's not a fullback. And there were other players that I feel like Ohio State could have put in positions that would have been more successful than what they were asking Nate Roberts to do. At the same time, he has been on the field in Big Ten games. He's been on the field against Texas in a spot that I never saw coming. That's not nothing. That's meaningful reps under his belt that he's going to learn from and grow from. And he's got a full offseason and maybe an offensive role that will be better suited to his skill set. I don't know. I hear what you're saying, and I've heard Ohio State coaches talk about him becoming that All-American. That's going to be the flagship, sales pitch for the future of that spot. But like, I'm not giving up on it. I'm not doubting it. I just year one doesn't really tell me anything about what that's going to look like, and I can't wait to see it one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the rub, though. Like, you don't know how valuable last year truly was for Nathan Roberts, because he was playing a position he's not going to be asked to play this year. And then you look at, he played in 13 games for Ohio State. The only game he did not play was the last one, when Ohio State obviously went out of its way to avoid running those heavy jumbo packages against Miami, because A, they were behind early in the game, and B, they just didn't. I think Ryan Day realized that they weren't working the way that they anticipated that they would throughout the year. The challenge here, of course, is we're in a different era of football. And when you are a high priority recruit, when you are making significant amount of money as a freshman, even at a position that Ohio State knows is a developmental position, you have to come in and play. Because if Nathan Roberts didn't play last year, would Nathan Roberts be on this roster heading into this year? That's a question that I don't think a lot of people would have thought they had to think about before a year ago. But now we see what happens with the Quincy Porters of the world. We see what happens with the Fahim Delanes, et cetera. We both know, and from talking to people, that there was a major push from Oklahoma to get Nate Roberts to not return to Columbus in January. And that obviously didn't happen. But now the primary reason that happens is because Nate Roberts has to believe fully that he's going to be tight end number one on this team. And if you're Ohio State, he has to be, because that's the way if you're going to tell any recruit, and Ohio State's in a fight for Brock Williams, the number 2 ranked tight end in the country in 2027, between Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas. If Ohio State wants to be able to turn around and talk to Brock Williams or any tight end down the road and say, hey, you're going to come in, you're going to play, then you have to show the guy that he's going to come in and play tight end, not come in and play fullback, because that no one cares about that. And yeah, I mean, Keenan Bailey played a lot of tight ends, a lot of snaps last year, but if 20% of them are being played at fullback, is that going to be appealing to a tight end around the country who thinks he's going to be a pass catcher in the college game? I don't know. We're going to find that out. But what you see is that you have a 7th-year guy like Hunter Wilson coming in. His job, Mason Williams' job, is going to be able to bring Nate Roberts up to speed and say, this is how you become an every down, full college tight end. And then you use Bennett Christian and Brody Lennon and maybe Mason Williams in the other roles, because Nate Roberts has to be your guy. He has to be like TE1.
Just in case he isn't, I think that's why that transfer portal work was so critical for Ohio State, because I just assumed from the handful of games of Northwestern that I watched, there's no way that they had a tight end who would have had 28 catches in that offense. They were so limited at quarterback. Well, Hunter Wilson accomplished that. Mason Williams, won't lie, Spencer Holbrook at Letterman Row can break down a lot more Bobcats football than I can, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the way that the tight end development worked at that program based on what we saw from Will Kazmarek over the last 2 years. So I assume that he's going to be able to come in and do a lot of that rugged down in, down out blocking that Ohio State needs at that position. Will it be a finished product in March or April? Took a while before Will Kazmarek got up to speed on that front, but that's also the way of the world. When you're talking, Berm, about you have to play these top flight recruits right away if you want to get the next one, or if you want to keep them on your roster, that's not the only way to manage a roster anymore. That's not the only way to build a room. So Ohio State is doing both simultaneously. And we know for sure that they still want to be a development program at their core. But I think maybe there's at least a hedging of the bets between that combination, because they took two. And maybe you say that they needed to take two because they lost both Max Klare and Will Kazmarek, and that would be fair. But I don't think they approached this offseason as highly as they think of Nate Roberts, but like, well, all the eggs are in this basket, and I hope it works. There's a legitimate chance that like the workload could be split between all three of those, or the veterans could outright take it, which then gives you a different sales pitch to every transfer portal tight end around the country if that's the case. So, I think they're trying to have it both ways, which is you sort of have to do that anymore in college football.
Yeah, well, you lost 3 of your top 4 tight ends from a year ago, so you had to do something to replace them, because the guys that you had behind them, again, LeBlanc not ready to play, Lennon not ready to play, Nate Roberts probably wasn't ready to play full-time at tight end, but Ohio State's always known that. That's the thing. Tight end has never been a position where they expected a guy to come in and be the guy. So a part of that hedging now is not just recruiting high-level players and playing them early to make sure that they stick around, but it's also to make sure that you don't waste an investment for 4 years. Because if that guy can't get ready, if Nate Roberts doesn't come out and prove that he's that guy this year, well, then at least you know early that you have to make a change. You have to pivot. So, I mean, Nate Roberts is going to be one of the 2 most used tight ends on this team. Probably on the position review preview a year ago, I said I thought Max Klare would be the 3rd leading receiver on Ohio State's team. I think I might have said 2nd at that time.
I think you said 2nd.
So he finished 3rd on the roster. I would be shocked if Nate Roberts doesn't have the most catches of any tight end on this team next year. I will be shocked if he approaches the 43 that Max Klare had. I mean, so I think in general, I think you might see more of a leveling off in that room, and more of an even split between Welsing and Nate Roberts as far as who's the leader of catching the ball at tight end. But for Ohio State to be its best, for Julian Sayin to have his best available weapons, I think it has to be Nate Roberts. And so the pressure goes to him. It goes to Keenan Bailey, but it's also to say, it's not just to say we owe it to him to play him early. It's to say we owe it to ourselves to find out if he can.
Yeah. Well, you got to have options. You got to have a plan too, which fortunately Awaken 180 had for you.
Awaken 180 did have a plan for me. They still do, even though I'm in maintenance mode. I'm not stuck eating just the meal replacements every day, which is not a problem because they were actually a lot better than I anticipated. I did not struggle with hunger. I did not feel like I was missing out on anything other than cheese every once in a while. But I'm having cheese again, and I still feel great. I still have my meetings with Coach Mandy. I still log every meal on the app. The plan is there. It works. It guides you through it. And honestly, when it comes to building a program, if you don't have a plan, there's no point. And awaken180weightloss.com, go there. You can start your own plan today. I bet it's February 11th. February is a short month, but anybody who got started now would still lose probably 15 pounds by the end of February. It's that effective.
February, such a great month. And it ends on a super high note. The week is going to end on a high note right here on The Beat, presented by the Waterworks, when we have a Freaky Friday mailbag. Make sure that you get those questions in. That's to theaustinandbermshow@gmail.com. Again, our email is theaustinandbermshow@gmail.com. We'll take those questions as we get there to the end of this week, a Valentine's Day week. And it'll be a super sweet episode as we cap off this a little bit quieter, knock on wood, month of February. I think that there's going to be some news on the coaching front. I think a lot of the contractual negotiations, signing of paperwork is about to be complete for Ohio State in a lot more ways than just one. So could have some news to break down with some snappy J's on that front as well. But if that's necessary, of course, you're going to find it in the feed at 97.1 The Fan on their YouTube channel, 10 TV's YouTube channel, or 10 TV Plus, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. So we appreciate all of you guys for tuning in, guys and gals, because I know that that's the case as well from some of the emails and some of the folks who have been nice enough to say hello over the last couple of weeks. So it's been a Three Thoughts Thursday. That's actually a tight ends review preview. Thanks for joining us on the Austin and Birm Show. He's Birm. I'm Austin. We'll talk to you on Friday.